All right, so we're going to look at attitudes that are held by individuals and how it's possible to change those attitudes through something called persuasion. So first, attitudes are very simply defined as how we experience and feel about various external stimuli. Attitudes, so it's like how do we experience and react to the world around us, essentially. And there are three, it's kind of a combination of three elements. The affective or emotional, how you feel about something. The cognitive, which is the perceptual, logical kind of understanding of it. And then the behavioral component, which is how you generally respond in given situations. And if you know you respond in negative ways to certain things, then you tend to view them a little more negatively. And these attitudes tend to be acquired through various means of conditioning, not necessarily always classical conditioning, but sometimes we do it through observational conditioning and through observational learning as we develop attitudes that way. And attitudes can be both explicit, which is things that we are aware of and consciously thinking of and able to easily call to mind. They can also be implicit, and those would be like biases and other things that we kind of tuck deep down that we don't always think about, but nevertheless are pervasive. So that's attitudes. And then one of the key things in social psychology is understanding how do we change people's attitudes. Because that ends up being oftentimes the goal of human interaction, right? Person-to-person interaction quite often forms itself through persuasion. So persuasion is defined as the process by which either an individual or a group can influence the attitudes of another individual or another group. And so it's there's kind of various ways in which that's done. And there's a lot of contributing factors to persuasion, right? The characteristics of the persuader are crucial. That person who is trying to do the persuading must be trustworthy. The motive of the persuader is also important. So an example of that is you may have like a musician who's asking for $5 for themselves because musicians aren't paid enough, and that's not necessarily super persuasive. But if that same musician's asking for $5 to keep the arts alive in a middle school, then maybe you're a little more inclined to donate that $5. The other is interpersonal attractiveness. People who tend to be good-looking are more likable and share the same opinions of us, tend to also be more effective in persuading us of certain things. Whether or not that's good or not, I'll leave up to you. And then the nature of the message, kind of how is this message presented to us, has a huge impact on how it's received and whether or not it is persuasive or not. One of the key theories surrounding persuasion is something called the Elaboration likelihood model. And the Elaboration likelihood model explains when people are going to be persuaded by the content of a message, and then when they're going to be influenced by other outside superficial things that are not necessarily related to the content / argument that is being made. And this, in the Elaboration likelihood model, they argue for three key elements. First, the message characteristics. And that is the features of the message. So is the message logical? Does it use data and evidence? Does it have key points? Is it organized in a logical manner? And then it could also include, it's not necessarily always limited to those sorts of content things, but it could also include superficial things. Was the persuasive message short? Was it too long? Is the grammar complex or is it simplistic? That could have an impact as well. Next is the source characteristics of the person or group. Who is this coming from? Do they have expertise? Do they have knowledge? Are they trustworthy? You're more likely probably to believe something by the New York Times than by the high school newspaper because they are experts. They've been through schooling for it. They've been trained. They've got years of experience. You're more likely to believe a teacher than a third grader because, again, the expertise and the knowledge. And then the other thing is the target characteristics of the person who's receiving the message. So that includes a lot of things, but Do they have high self-esteem? Are they intelligent or not? What kind of mood are they in? What kind of message are you trying to get across? What is the purpose? Where are they living? What is their socioeconomic status? Those sorts of things are all included in the elaboration likelihood model. And so, according to this, persuasion follows two different routes. The first is the central route, and under the central route, people are persuaded by the content of the argument. They are persuaded by logic, by facts, by a solid argument that is made. Here's point A, B, C, or D. The other route is the peripheral route, in which people focus on superficial or secondary characteristics. I didn't like the way his hair looked. I didn't like his accent. He stuttered over those words. He didn't make sense here. He's not good looking. He's too fat. That was too long. I was bored. Those are the peripheral routes. And so the elaboration likelihood model suggests that people choose the central route only when they are motivated to listen to the logic of the argument, when they actually want to hear the argument, and they are not distracted by other things, but are actually giving the full attention to the argument being made. If those two conditions are not met, then they choose peripheral. So if someone is not listening to you and is not distracted, so if someone is not listening to you and they are distracted, then they are not choosing that central route. The only time the central route of persuasion is followed is when someone wants to hear your message, they're motivated to listen to logic, and when they are not distracted. The value then, so it's difficult to meet those necessary conditions, but the value to that is that messages that are processed through that central route have longer lasting persuasive outcomes. So if we allow ourselves to be persuaded by logic and arguments and by being focused, then we are more likely to believe that for longer versus peripheral routes, which we tend to kind of go through very quickly. So that's important. And then what they've also found in this elaboration likelihood model is that certain people and certain groups of people can be influenced to change their attitude more so than other people or groups. And so they found that people with high self-esteem are less easily persuaded than those with low self-esteem. And so the results of that are groups that are trying to convince people to join them target low self-esteem people and try to persuade them. And this they tend to be very successful with. So you'll see various hate groups will target people with low self-esteem in order to get them and persuade them that this is the right way to go. It's not always negative. Sometimes people in religion target those with low self-esteem in order to help them, and those people tend to be more easily persuaded. They lack the confidence in themselves to believe their convictions, and thus they are more likely to be persuaded to believe what somebody else is telling them. And again, if you can get to them through the central route, it will be much more effective than if you get through the peripheral route. And then the last thing is cognitive dissonance. And so cognitive dissonance occurs when our attitudes and our behaviors contradict each other. And the idea behind cognitive dissonance is that people don't like this feeling, and they change to end that tension that exists. So if I have a pre-held attitude and my behavior doesn't match that, I'm likely to change something. And Leon Festinger argues that people are more likely to change their attitude to fit the behavior rather than the behavior to fit the attitude, because it's just easier to change attitude instead of behavior. For example, most people follow the law. Most people are law-abiding citizens and want to follow the law. But when it comes to driving, most people also speed. And speeding is a behavior that would technically be illegal. And their attitude is, I don't want to break the law. So they have this cognitive dissonance. So they have to change something. And for the most part, people don't slow down. For the most part, people accept that driving fast is okay. So they change their attitude about the law in that given situation. And then they've relieved that tension of, I want to follow the law, but I also want to go fast with, it's okay to break this law, because it becomes a rationalization attempt. And so sometimes people change behavior, but quite often, according to Festinger, people change their attitude.